Hi, everybody. It's welcome back to Sunday night in the Astro Imaging Channel. This is Alex, and Molly is here with Tolga and Terry and Eric, and we're all going to get ready to present you a program. I'm going to go real quickly through the announcements because we've got a special. Molly's going to be talking to us especially today. Um, the calendar. Um, let's look back a week at Andy Campbell. He was here last week, and from Andy's Astro. Oh, it's just he had some beautiful images there, and you guys were talking about his images and stuff like that. And for some reason, the internet broke. And so after a while, we realized, hey, the internet's broke. And we just invited Andy to come back. We haven't set a time for him to come back yet, but Andy will be coming back and finishing up and adding a little bit more to his presentation. And if you enjoyed his program last week, hey, come on back. Okay, please do that. Today, Jay and Neil are going to be here, and they're going to be telling us about some projects that they've been involved with that have been recognized by the Astronomical League and some other things. Barbara Harris is going to be here next week, observing stars with your DSLR. So anybody can do it. Anybody can contribute to science with that. Andrew and Andy's Astro was here last week. So Amy's going to come in the week after that, October 25th, and tell us about assembling an image train. That's Amy Astro coming in. And then Alistair Simon will be coming in to tell us about how to do wide field mosaics. But as you can see, we need you people to get in here and contact us. Tell us your name, what you'd like to talk about. We need presenters. If you don't help us present some stuff, it'll be back on us, and we don't want to go to open sessions and all that other stuff. You've got to come along and help us. So please volunteer yourself. And if you don't feel like doing it yourself, maybe you need to somebody else to come along. I'm not sharing my screen all this time. Rather than go back and redo all that stuff, I'm just going to turn it right over to Molly. And Molly, you take it from here and tell us about some changes that you've made over on the YouTube stuff.
Hey, yeah. Actually, the video stopped going out for some reason. Not an internet problem; it's an OBS problem. So I'm gonna troubleshoot that real quick. If you
okay, why don't we go listen to Jay and Neil for a while, and then you
and I'll come back on. But yeah, there's just a black screen going out to YouTube right now, so I'm fixing that.
Okay. Yeah, we shouldn't start their presentation. It's not going out.
Oh, so where are we?
Yeah, our audio is still going out. So chit chat about something. The audio is still going, so you guys can talk about something.
I had an opportunity to be the presenter at What's Up for the Orange County astronomers last week. If any of you down in Orange County or Southern California in general want to get into astroimaging, those guys do a really good job with their astroimaging special interest group. It's available at OCA someplace. I don't know what their name is. Hey, it looks like you started up again.
Yeah, I fixed it. We're good.
Okay. We just having a particularly long lag time, or what?
No, it's fine. I had to play the video for a brief second to get our video to come back up, but we're good to go. So I can real quick show the thing on YouTube and then hop into Jay's presentation.
Okay.
Okay, cool. I will share my screen. Let's see. All right. So what I wanted to show was I've now organized the Astro Imaging Channel YouTube site or YouTube channel into playlists so that it's easier for you to go and find videos with topics that you're interested in revisiting, especially if people are going through a procedure on image processing or talking about a particular device. Because we have quite a few videos on the channel now. I think it's over 300, and it can be kind of hard to find exactly what you're looking for. So if you go to YouTube and search for the Astro Imaging channel and go to our channel, this is what you'll see. And we have different tabs here. And if you go to the playlists tab, you can see the playlists that I've created here. So I have a off the beaten path astrophotography, so kind of things that are fall outside of the normal things that we often do in astrophotography, a whole bunch on image processing, general tips and tricks, videos from conferences and star parties, and a wide variety of all the topics that kind of these broad areas of topics. That way it should be easier for you to find videos. And I'm probably my next campaign is going to be to go through and tag the videos a little more descriptively as well to make them easier to find. So hopefully this will help you in finding the video you want to see from the Astro Imaging channel on YouTube.
Okay, thank you, Molly.
Can I add one more thing to this? So, and I'm talking to the viewers on this. If you guys have a part of a video that is interesting to you, then you might think that be interesting to other people as well. Like it could be a 5-minute part of a hour-and-a-half video, 45 minutes in. Let us know, and we'll either tag that timeline or we'll make a new video of that little small part of it.
And that way we'll have little tidbits instead of the 45. Hi, Bella. That way we'll have little tidbits instead of the 45-minute, 50-minute show each time. I think that we do a really good job in a lot of ways with the Astro Imaging channel, getting a lot of information across. But one of the things we don't do is package it well enough so that it's easily digested by people. And we simply have to get that done. We could use some help doing that. If you'd like help, if you'd like to help us do that, we sure would appreciate it. Anyway, Molly, were you going to introduce Jay and Neil, or was I going to?
You go ahead, Alex.
Hi. I first heard about Jay and Neil's adventures a month and a half, 2 months ago. The Astronomical League had featured some of them. They were in a magazine, things like that. And I've seen a couple of presentations that they put out, and the presentations actually introduced themselves. So, Jay, are you ready to take over?
Yes, hopefully you guys can hear me all right.
Go for it. Yeah, we can hear you. Let's see your screen. Share your screen.
So do you see the screen?
Yep, Jay is presenting, and here you go. Yep.
Okay, my name is Jay. I am 17 years old, and I'm here with my brother Neil. He is 14. We live in Houston, Texas, in the United States, and have been homeschooled for 5 years. So without further ado, I'd like to talk about today's presentation. It's creating the face-stacked moon and a high-resolution panorama of the Milky Way. Now, the face-stacked moon is based on the notion that you can't see all of the craters during a full moon. In fact, the full moon is not the best time to photograph craters. So what we did was we cut out the different craters of each face from crescent to gibbous, cut out the clearest craters of each face and combine them together into a composite full moon image in which all of the craters are visible. And our Milky Way panorama is a mosaic composed of 200 images. So this panorama is what we're going to talk about first. And you can stick around to find out how we did the face-stacked moon. Now, a little bit about ourselves and how we got into photography. We started back in 2011. I was 7 years old and my brother was 5. And since then, we have been to all of the lower 48 states in the US, which doesn't include Alaska and Hawaii. And we enjoy different types of photography other than astro. We do landscape imaging, wildlife photography, and also macro. And we've won numerous awards for our work. Now here are some pictures of us in our travels. Now I'll be showing you some of our landscape images, as well as some wildlife and macro. So this one's from Maine, and Maine is famous for its lighthouses. Utah, Arizona, and we took this picture just last week, right here in Texas. These hummingbirds are migrating south for the winter, and we took full advantage of this season. And this was taken using a Canon 400mm lens. Now, macro photography means to take pictures of small subjects. Here we have a dead specimen of a wasp up close using a macro lens that is designed for taking pictures up close at subjects such as these. So back to astronomy. It began in 2018. 2 years ago, we joined an astronomy club, and we got into it with this. This is a homemade telescope we made out of a Tootsie Roll canister, and that objective lens at the front is 3 inches in diameter, and the eyepiece is 1 inch in diameter. So this telescope actually got us started in astronomy. And from there, we even built a reflector telescope out of a salt canister. The eyepiece is right here, it's 1 inch, and the mirror is inside, which is about 3 inches. And all of these materials were found at home. So we have a passion for building homemade telescopes out of everyday items. And we go to local schools in the area, elementary and middle schools, to share our passion for astronomy and to show kids how to build their own homemade telescopes. And these outreach events are called Astronomy on Wheels, which are organized by the Fort Bend Astronomy Club, which we are members of. And we had been doing outreach a lot last year before the pandemic. So together we call these two telescopes the sweet and salty duo. And the Tootsie Roll telescope is a hit among the smaller kids at the schools that we go and do outreach at. And we've also added 2 more refractor telescopes to the collection, which were made using toilet roll tubes and cheap magnifying glasses. And since the reflector is quite difficult to use handheld, we decided to make a mount and a tripod. This tripod was it came with a small point and shoot camera that we no longer use, so it was the perfect match for the small reflector telescope. Now, since we joined an astronomy club, we were exposed to all of their astro images, and that actually inspired us to go into astrophotography. We started it with deep sky imaging. And for that, we decided to use whatever we had instead of buying equipment. So we had the Canon EOS R. Actually, before that, we had a 5D Mark III. We upgraded to an EOS R, which is a mirrorless camera. And this is the tracking mount that we use, along with a guide camera and a guide scope. So this got us started with deep sky imaging. And as for the telescope, we don't use one. We still don't have a telescope. Instead, we use lenses that we have accumulated over the years while doing photography. For deep sky imaging, we use the 150 to 600 millimeters f5 to 6.3. And for regular Milky Way imaging, to include landscapes with it, we use the 14mm 1.8, and the 1.8 is really good at capturing the Milky Way details because it's such a wide aperture. It can greatly reduce shutter speeds and make the Milky Way look brighter overall. Compared to the 2.8 of the 16 to 35 millimeters, we really like the 14mm lens. But on long trips, we often take this one because it offers us a range of focal lengths rather than just being a prime lens. So this is kind of restricting. And another lens that we use is the Canon 24 to 70 millimeters at the same aperture of f2.8. We use the Sigma 135 millimeter to make the 200 panel mosaic of the whole Milky Way galaxy. And this was at aperture f1.8, which was good for capturing the details. Now I'll be showing you some of our early attempts at deep sky imaging. This is a single 300-second exposure of the Orion Nebula. using the Sigma 600 millimeter. And here we have the horse head. And as we got better and better at deep sky imaging, we learned new techniques such as stacking. And the Orion Nebula was one of our first attempts, so it was just a single frame, whereas here it's 11 frames stacked to overall get a good picture with less noise. And here we have the Pleiades star cluster that we took in California. And the reason we travel to dark places and do deep sky imaging instead of doing it in our backyard is that we don't have a good backyard. There are way too many trees, and Polaris, the star that's used for polar alignment in the northern hemisphere, is completely obscured by trees. So we can't do polar alignment from our backyard, which is why we travel to dark places like those in California, like Joshua Tree National Park and Death Valley. We travel to those places to do deep sky imaging, and as well as Big Bend National Park and national parks in Utah. The Andromeda Galaxy and the Orion constellation. So we have thoroughly enjoyed doing deep sky imaging. We're still improving on it, but really we didn't have the best equipment. Like we didn't have dedicated astro cameras, and our cameras weren't even modified, so they were blocking a lot of the good signal, which is often in the H alpha wavelengths. And so there's no way to get better without purchasing a telescope and a better tracking mount possibly. So instead of doing that, we decided to focus on our strengths instead. And one was photography, years of experience in it. And the other was traveling. And because we traveled, we had access to dark sky places. And this was before the pandemic. And so these three are the perfect formula for taking pictures of the Milky Way. Now, here's our very first image of the Milky Way galaxy that we took in Tucson last year. And it was pretty good as a start, but we were quite disappointed. And it was okay because February is not the right time to take pictures of the Milky Way, as the Milky Way rises just after the sun does. So that's why this glow is here. It's from the sun. And so February is not the right time, which meant we needed to do it in the summer. And we did that and got better pictures of the Milky Way galaxy. And we spent many nights at Big Bend National Park doing this. So here we use the 16 to 35 millimeters. At that time, we didn't have the 14. Now, a guideline that we follow is the rule of 500, which helps us determine the shutter speed that we have to use. And this is how the formula goes. So it's 500 divided by the focal length of the lens. If the focal length that we're using is 16 millimeters, that's equivalent to about a 30-second exposure without getting star trails that are too noticeable. And it's important to have this guideline. Otherwise, when you print large and you have exposures longer than this that break the rule of 500, you tend to get noticeable star trails which might ruin the prints. So that's why we follow this guideline. And if, for example, we use a 24 millimeter lens, the exposure time reduces by 10 seconds, and so on. So if we were to use a 500 millimeter lens, it'd just be a 1 second exposure. So this is what we normally follow when we decide what shutter speed to use. And from there, we've even taken self-portraits. Now this is me in the foreground. And since this is a 30-second exposure, I had to stand there for 30 whole seconds holding my hands up in the air. And it was hard to keep still. This was not the first attempt, but out of 3 or 4. So my arms were getting pretty tired after that. Here's another picture of me pretending they hold a galaxy in my arms. And then we've also done light painting to add more interest to the foreground. And this is me and Neil sitting admiring the Milky Way. Now we call this one Front Seat at the Milky Way Theater, which is a panorama composed of 3 images with me and Neil sitting in the foreground under this picnic spot. And in fact, I won 3rd place for this in the youth category of Capture the Dark photo contest, which was hosted by the International Dark Sky Association this year, the summer of this year. And one of our favorite places to visit is Arches National Park. During the day, we love to photograph the landscapes, such as this arch. We would take pictures of the Milky Way. So here I'm going to explain a technique that we use known as exposure blending. Now here are 2 images. The one on the left has a nice clean foreground that's bright enough to be noticed, but the Milky Way is overexposed, and there are star trails, of course, because this is a 60-second exposure and it breaks the rule of 500. Whereas on the right, this is the correct exposure for the Milky Way, but the foreground is way too dark. What I want to do here is blend this sky's Milky Way with the foreground on the left. And this technique is known as exposure blending. That gets rid of this overexposed sky and the underexposed foreground on the right. Now, we use Photoshop to do all this. Photoshop does have automated tools for doing it, but it just doesn't do a very good job. Like in HDR Pro, it just messes things up. Same thing with Adobe Camera Raw. That too has a HDR merging tool. So the only way this can be done is manually, because Photoshop doesn't decide to blend the right sky in. And to do that manually, I've created screenshots in Photoshop. And yeah, we call this the road to Milky Way. And my brother won 2nd place for this image in the same competition. Yeah, here are the screenshots that I've taken. I can't really open Photoshop right now because it'll freeze my computer. So what I've done is I've taken screenshots of all of these steps as well as some short video clips. Here we have, let me use the zoom tool. Here we have both of our images loaded into Photoshop as layers. And now I want to blend these 2 together. The way to do that is to first create a layer mask on the top layer. Normally I'd paint in the darker exposure. So clicking on the layer mask, alt clicking on it will get you a black layer mask, which is just Photoshop basics. That's going to temporarily conceal this layer, revealing what's beneath it, which is layer 0, the overexposed image, as you can see on the left. Now, the next step is to make a selection of the sky. And there are many tools to do this in Photoshop. I'm going to talk about the color range tool, which does a pretty good job at selecting the sky. And that's what I like about Photoshop, is that it has so many different tools that can do essentially the same thing. And you can use any tool based on what you're comfortable with. Now let's take a closer look at the color range dialog box. And there are many options like reds, yellows. What they do is if you select any of these colors, Photoshop is going to automatically select those colors in your image. So there weren't a whole lot of blues or cyans in the image, so there's not going to be a whole lot of selection there, but there are plenty of yellows and reds, as you saw in the rocks. But what I want to do here is select highlights. And highlights is going to select the sky, but it's not an entirely perfect selection. And to make it better, we need to adjust these sliders. So the goal here is the sky should be fully white and the foreground should be pitch black. And by adjusting these sliders, I got the desired result. You might see these lines in the foreground, but those can be fixed by just painting those in black with a brush tool. So I'd hit OK. Now we have our selection activated. The next step is to use the brush tool, which is over here. And if I had hovered over it, I would get this dialog box. So select the brush tool. Now I want to paint with white. And right now I have black selected. And to paint with white, I just hit that tiny double arrow there, which switches the foreground and background colors. Or you could just hit X on the keyboard. Does the same thing. And then now I have white selected. And here's a short video clip of me painting the sky in. Activated. So with the brush tool, simply click on the inside the selection, and it's simply going to paint in. And that's about it. Now I want to get a preview like this, and to do that, you must alt-click on the layer mask icon in order to get this preview. And this preview helps you see what areas you've missed. Like this area of the sky is completely white, but not these two areas. So what I want to do is select the brush tool again and paint those completely white. And you might see some white areas in the foreground here. You can always switch the colors and paint with black. Now here's another short video clip of me doing just that. So the brush tool, and then alt click on the layer mask, which I just did. And now I'm painting away those areas that have not been washed out with white. And then I just painted that with black. And now we've got a nice seamless blend of the sky and the foreground, just as we wanted it. And then this technique is so useful because now I can individually edit the different elements within the scene. So now when I do a curves adjustment to the foreground, it's not going to affect the sky. And of course, there needs to be a clipping mask, which is a Photoshop basic. And then I can apply a curves adjustment to the sky and edit that without affecting the foreground. And after all those edits, we ended up with an image like this. Now here's another exposure blend which uses the exact same technique. This rock formation in the foreground is called balanced rock. And a lot of tourists visit that place during the day, not a whole lot during night. So we had this place to ourselves. And here's another picture of an exposure blend, which was taken from Arches National Park. And the rock on the right is the same balanced rock, but from a different perspective. We went around it. Sometimes we like to break the rule of 500 for artistic purposes, such as using this 500-second exposure to get star trails in the sky, and it suits well to this foreground. This was taken at Canyonlands National Park, which is just next to Arches. So we also had access to that. And we used the 24 to 70 millimeter lens, and this was about 70 millimeters or so, zooming into some distant objects. This is a canyon, and there's a river over there. Now, this is not a single exposure, but a combination of 130-second exposures that were combined using a software called Star Stacks to make this star trailed image. So we had fun experimenting with star trails. And here's a compilation of some of our time-lapse videos that we've taken so far. We did this one in Arches National Park, and as you can see, there are plenty of planes flying around. The next time-lapse is from New Zealand. You can see the large and small Magellanic Clouds. Here's another time-lapse from New Zealand. And this last one is the same picture I showed you, but converted into a time lapse. And as you can see, there are not a whole lot of planes, which is why we like Big Bend. Big Bend surprisingly has so few planes that all the planes are always near the horizon. None of them flying above us. We only see satellites and meteors from Big Bend National Park. That's why it's one of our favorite places to visit, because you don't have any interference from planes above. But even after all of these adventures, there are some things that were lacking in our images. And because resolution lacked, so did detail in the Milky Way galaxy. So here's a 30-second exposure using the 14 millimeter lens. Let's take a closer look at the galactic center. And obviously it's star-trailed, and there's not a whole lot of detail in this image, which disappointed us. So this meant because we used a short focal length, 14 millimeters, we got less detail. And so we decided to use a longer focal length in order to get more detail out of the Milky Way. And when we did that, we were really impressed with the result. But the Milky Way doesn't fit in this small field of view using the 135 millimeter lens. So we decided to make a panorama of the entire galaxy using the Sigma 135 millimeter lens. And we knew this was going to be a really big project. Here's a sequence of images that we used to construct part of the panorama. And we're not done yet. This is only the galactic center. At least half of it. We still had a long way to go. And by spending more time imaging the different parts of the Milky Way, up until Elephant's trunk, we combined them in Photoshop and got this final output, which displays the Milky Way in a whole lot more detail and resolution. So it turns out it's 60 images, which we took in Big Bend National Park. This is a single image for reference. It may not look like 60 images. That's because the images had to overlap, and so that Photoshop would be able to recognize where to stitch them. And while we were there, we came across many interesting creatures of the night. So just as we got down to set up our equipment at Big Bend, we came across this tarantula the size of a baseball. And it was pretty terrifying, but it wasn't really doing anything. We spent 3 hours imaging the Milky Way, and it was there the whole time. As we were setting up taking down our equipment, it was still there. We even encountered a rattlesnake on the road. And at night, we would hear distant howls of coyotes, and we even managed to take a picture of one just before sunset at Big Bend. And we call this one Coyote in the Spotlight, and my brother won a photography competition with this image. Now, I'm going to show you how we stitched a couple of images from the panorama in Photoshop. Here we have 4 images. Let me use the zoom tool. So we have our 4 images loaded into Photoshop as layers. Now, the first step was to align the layers. You go to Edit, Auto Align Layers, and there are many options, 5 of them, and there's one called Auto. It turns out Auto is not really good at stitching mosaics such as these. It tends to use these other projections and stretches the images as a result. So we made the mistake of using this, and after we completed our 60 image panorama, we had to start all over again because we discovered that there were star trails because auto align layers use the other projection methods, which tends to stretch the image, and that's what we don't want. stretch the image. It only rotates, scales, and translates it, meaning translates, excuse me, translate. For some reason, I can't say that word. Okay, it means it just moves it around and doesn't stretch it. So now I have the 4 images aligned. The last step is to blend them together. Auto blend layers and selecting panorama and seamless tones and colors. You want content aware fill transparent areas unchecked, because if you check that, these transparent hair areas here are going to get filled with stars and unwanted data. So you don't want that checked. And that's it. Blending them together is quite simple. But it took 20 minutes for us to do that. And we have a very slow computer. 4 GB RAM and a 2-core processor is not that fast. Photoshop recommends an 8 GB RAM, and 4 GB is only half of that. So many times our computer ended up freezing. So this process of 4 images took 20 whole minutes. Now, because we had to do it in small steps, we had to wait it out and build up from there. We couldn't just stitch all the 60 images together. Photoshop would freeze if we do that. Turns out this method worked, building up in small steps. But as the images got larger and larger, so did the post-processing time. This whole set down here took 6 hours, then 8, 10, 20, and this last image took more than a day for Photoshop to stitch it. And our computers are so slow, it just takes a long time. That was one of the limitations of this project. Now, if numbers aren't your thing, we can show you a visual representation of how we group the images together and stitch them. So here we have the images raining down from the sky. There's the last image. Now this is how we group them into 4. And from there, 8. It's pretty straightforward. But it does take a long time. Now we crop the image just to remove all of those jagged edges, and this is what we get. We went back to Big Bend a couple weeks later to get even more of the northern portion, and that took 40 more hours to process. So in total, this image you see here took more than 100 hours, and it's 339 megapixels. Now all that was left to do was get the southern portion. We had started this project back in September, and we didn't go to the southern hemisphere until February. So all those months we didn't really do anything. We were just hoping to get to the southern hemisphere. And luckily, our parents planned a trip to South Island, New Zealand in February, which was just before the pandemic officially, just before the quarantine in the US officially started. And we spent a total of 6 days and 6 nights. This is the situation on the first night. There were so many clouds that imaging the Milky Way was quite difficult. Every frame we took had a cloud in it. And after 2 hours, we just gave up. Too many clouds. So on the next day, we visited Mount Cook National Park, which is designated a dark sky place by the International Dark Sky Association. And we hiked a 5 to 6 mile hike out and back to Mount Cook, and it was quite fun. But we were looking forward to astro imaging that night, but we just couldn't. It was cloudy, and rain showers were forecast for the entire night. So we decided not to do any imaging. And on day 3, we visited waterfalls and lakes. This is a picture from the campsite we were staying at. And here's what it looked like at night. But the problem was, as soon as we set up our tracking mount, a fog suddenly came and obscured the Milky Way. Plus, the crescent moon was right on top of the galactic center. The green vehicle in the foreground is our camper van, or an RV that we had rented, which it gave us the freedom to drive around and camp wherever we wanted in campsites. If we had instead stayed at hotels, we wouldn't have had the flexibility to go and do astro imaging. So that's why we decided to rent an RV. Plus, the image that you see here is a 12 image panorama, a 3x4 stack. So 4 images across and 3 images high. And this is what it looked like when we took a picture using the 135mm lens. The stars are blown out, plus there are clouds and fog. Now, the next day was even worse with fog and even more clouds. You can just barely see the large Magellanic Cloud and even the small Magellanic Cloud just peeking out from, from behind the clouds. The next day we spent more time doing landscape imaging, but it was essentially the same thing when it came to nighttime. Rain, clouds, and fog. We were getting worried at this point. We thought if we didn't get the panorama done by the last night, we would leave New Zealand empty-handed. But luckily, the very last campsite that we went to, despite the weather forecast showing a cloudy sky, was clear, extremely clear. There were a few clouds passing by here and there, but not long enough to disrupt our session. We started imaging at 9 p.m. At that time, only the Carina Nebula and the Coalsack Nebula was visible, which is right here. This part took some time to rise, which was taken at 5 a.m. So we had to wait the entire night just so we can get this portion from the Carina Nebula all the way to the galactic center. And it was quite important that we get the galactic center so that we would be able to connect it with the northern part. And of course, we can't leave New Zealand without taking the small Magellanic Cloud and the large one. So we did that using the 135. And we even did a 6-image stack of the Carina Nebula. Here's the panorama, 85-image panorama that we ended up with. And as you can see, it's quite jagged, more disorganized than the northern hemisphere part. And that's because the southern skies are unfamiliar to us. And so we decided to get as much of it as possible because we never knew if we were going to go back to the southern hemisphere. So that's why we took as much sky as we could. And then we cropped the image, comparing it with the 14mm lens. It really does make a difference. Let's look at these cross sections. Now the 135 definitely has way more detail than the one on the right. And that's why we liked this project, because we could milk out all of those details. So we combined the southern part with the northern, and it's now 205 images. It's about 90,000 pixels wide and 6,900 pixels in height. Each individual image produced by the Canon EOS R is 30 megabytes. The size of the final panorama is 3 gigabytes, but the one you see here is 1 gigabyte. Each image was 30 megapixels, while this one is 620. And that's a single image for reference. So we started this project back in September, and we finished processing in March. It took over 200 hours for our slow computers to post-process and stitch all of those images together. As for the number of computer crashes, there were way too many to count. I call this one Downtown Milky Way, and it won an astrophotography competition. So that's pretty neat. We got another thing out of this project. So obviously you can't appreciate all of the details just by looking at this narrow image on the screen. So in the next slide, we created a video that shows the details up close of the image. So we're panning from left to right. We've labeled all of the deep sky objects that we found interesting, as well as some constellations that fit in the field of view of this cropped image. So up until the elephant's trunk, all the way to Cassiopeia and Perseus, that was from the second time we went to Big Bend. And from the elephant's trunk all the way to the galactic center was the data acquired during the first night that we visited. And so we even managed to capture something unexpected other than all of these nebula, and that's a green meteor that was in one of our frames, and we decided to include it in the panorama. So that was pretty neat, quite unexpected. So now we get on to the southern hemisphere, Alpha Centauri, the closest star. And we admired the Coalsack Nebula. It was quite visible. And our favorite Southern Cross. And then we have a little bit more after the Carina Nebula, like the faint Gum Nebula, which our DSLR wasn't able to capture quite clearly. And so yeah, that's our mosaic, 200 image mosaic of the Milky Way. Now, we actually wanted to add more to this panorama. I mean, we got the northern and southern parts, but we didn't capture a whole lot of outside sky with it. And I mean by going up and down to give the Milky Way a bit more breathing space, as we call it. But since the pandemic began, we've been confined to our homes and we haven't been able to travel a lot. And so because of light pollution, we can't take pictures of the Milky Way. And so that's out of the question. We thought of deep sky imaging, but since our backyard has way too many trees, we can't see Polaris and we can't do that either. And so we decided to take up planetary imaging, and we were quite lucky that we acquired a Celestron C8 Smith-Cassegrain telescope, which was donated to us by a fellow astronomer who was moving to another state. And it was an old model from the 1980s, but we've made great use of it. And so my brother Neil is going to talk about some of the planetary imaging that we've done using that telescope, as well as the upcoming phase-stacked moon.
Jay, before you move on to that, could we ask you a couple questions?
Sure.
How did you plan out all your frames so that they weren't overlapped too much and they were overlapped just enough?
Okay, so we didn't really have any automated imaging software, and the majority of our time was actually spent planning. See, we only took 60 images, which were 30 seconds each. We were out there for about 3 hours. So 60 images at 30 seconds means it's about 30 minutes of exposure time. So 2.5 hours, we were figuring out all of the angles and slewing the mount, overlapping all of the images just enough. We usually do 50% so that we don't have any gaps, and that's what we don't want. So that was quite a challenge, especially since we didn't have any automated guiding software such as Stellarium or if there's anything else. And that was last year in September, which was when we just started deep sky imaging. We only had about 12 deep sky imaging sessions, so we're still getting used to the mount and hadn't started using any software besides PhD2 for the guiding. So we just did it manually.
So another question, were your parents there while you're doing all the imaging, or do they have their own activities?
Yes, they were there in the car.
So you are out there and they're inside. Do they have a
Yeah,
particular interest, or can you get them
they do
excited
have an
about
interest.
this?
They do have an interest. Occasionally they come out and see what we're doing. My dad has an interest in photography and he does some Milky Way imaging, but he doesn't use the tracking mount. We only we do it. And so oftentimes we're out there in the freezing cold while they're sitting in the car sleeping.
So I think in general, I'm looking at the comments. People are kind of blown away by the kind of results you've gotten, basically with fairly simple equipment or with regular photography equipment.
Yeah.
Especially considering how many of us, invest in very expensive pieces of equipment to do our imaging. So you have done something I don't think that anyone else that's watching right now could really do. That's an incredible investment of time and effort and developing your own techniques. So you have lots of experience in Photoshop. So I imagine that has come into be very helpful in developing your astrophotography.
Yeah, it has. I have experience with editing regular landscape and wildlife images, but not a ton with doing deep sky processing, such as using calibration frames and all those adjustments, like making stars smaller. We're still learning all those techniques, but as far as stitching panoramas are concerned, I think we're pretty good at that. We've discovered that Photoshop is not that great at making panoramas because it's just too slow. So we've resorted to using other panorama stitching software.
Did
Can
you
you tell us what that is?
Currently, we use Microsoft ICE. ICE stands for Image Composite Editor, and we haven't really tried it on the Milky Way panorama yet, at least, but we're doing it to other image mosaics, such as the wide angle shot that I took with a 14mm lens at one of the campsites in New Zealand. I used Microsoft ICE for that.
And Alex asks, are any of these images tracked?
Oh, you mean
When you,
which images? The
Well,
one with the landscapes?
the reason I asked that is that because maybe I missed something, but it seems like you described the rule of 500 as if you were talking about using a fixed mount, and yet just now you said you had a mount and you do track. What was your camera mounted on to take the pictures of the Milky Way?
You mean for the Milky Way panorama, right?
Yes.
The mosaic mounted on. So it's our DSLR is attached to a what kind of dovetail is it, Neil? It's a Vixen. It's a Vixen style dovetail, which goes on our Orion Series Pro tracking mount. And we didn't really have to use a guide scope. There were only 30-second exposures, and our tracking mount handled it pretty well. But for landscape, Milky Way landscape imaging, we don't use a tracking mount. It's just
No. Okay.
we just use a tripod.
And when you were telling Eric about how you planned out your pictures, It sounded like you said you pointed at the Milky Way, took a picture, and then adjusted the camera a little bit so that it covered another half frame, and then adjusted the camera again so it got another half frame, and just kept doing it till you got it all. Is that right?
Yeah, yes. It was quite a difficult process. We had to rely on what we saw in the camera. Sometimes we didn't get the Milky Way. We just got a field of stars with nothing in it. And then if we got that, we would just go back a couple of steps and go in the right direction from there.
So
Uh,
basically, you use just brute force alignment
Yes,
rather than software.
just point,
yes.
point and shoot, point and shoot. Hey,
Yep.
the where did you pick up these techniques? When every time you needed to learn a new skill, you looked up the internet, what people use, and saw YouTube and did it, or what? What did you do?
We've learned from many different sources, from the internet, websites, and a lot from YouTube. And we've watched a couple of videos on the Astro Imaging channel, such as one that covers the PhD2 guiding software.
Mm,
It was definitely a very helpful video.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of others that we've referred to, and a lot more YouTube videos we watched. And yeah, we've learned a lot from YouTube itself. That's our main, that's where we go to learn.
So
Okay.
if you took that panorama, you could actually print that out and fill an entire wall, a rather large wall. Has
We did
anyone
that.
shown interest, or yeah, have you done that already? Or
Yeah, we
have
have. It's not
how?
a it's not a single image, but made of six smaller images that we put side by side. Those were 13 by 19-inch prints. So the panorama is 13 inches high, and guess what? It's 9 feet wide.
Hmm.
So currently we're figuring out where to mount it.
You could actually go bigger, couldn't you?
Yeah, we could have, but we had the same 13 by 19 print, and we just decided to use it. It was cheaper.
Okay. You
Neil
want to
had,
go on to your
Neil,
planetary?
yeah.
Sure. So I'm going to show you a few images that we have taken of the planets. So here's an image of Jupiter that we took with our CA telescope, and we captured two of its moons transiting in front of it, Ganymede and Io. And on this very same night, we took a 3-hour time lapse of capturing the rotation of Jupiter as well as the movement of the moons and their shadows. So here's a small GIF that we made. And this is over 3 hours. So Jupiter rotates really fast. Here's our best picture of Saturn that we have taken when it was at opposition a few months ago. And Venus. And recently we took Mars. We enjoy planetary imaging, and we wanted to take the moon because we haven't taken the moon with our CA telescope. So that was what we did. And after a few nights imaging the moon, we came up with a project called the Phase Stacked Moon, and I'll talk about that later in the presentation. So now I'm going to show you a few images that we have taken of the moon. And obviously, the clearest craters of the moon are along the terminator, which is what divides the moon from day and night. And anything far away from the moon, you can't really see any craters there. When you compare two phases and zoom in, the craters circled are exactly the same, but the phase on the left, because the terminator is closer to the crater, that crater is much more prominent than the 80% phase where it's not very visible. Same thing for the crater at the bottom. So we thought, what if we could see all the craters at once? Well, we can see the whole surface of the moon at once, like the full moon, but you can't really see any craters, maybe a few here and there. For example, Copernicus. Here, Copernicus looks more like a smudge. But on a different phase, like this crescent phase, Copernicus really stands out. So what we did was we cut out craters from each phase, the most prominent ones, and blended them together in Photoshop to make a composite full moon. We had to pick which phases to image. There were the waxing phases. They were convenient because they appeared in the evening sky, but we couldn't image all of them because of too many trees in our backyard, and we could only see from the eastern sky up to the zenith, but not the western sky. So that meant we wouldn't be able to see the waxing crescent phases. And each phase is really important. So that was out of the question. There were the waning phases. We could image all of them, but they were inconvenient. So that meant it would appear in the morning sky. So we would have to get up in the middle of the night for more than a week to image all of them. So here are the waning phases that we took in 12 days. And the times we had to get up for each phase was different. For example, the 90% phase we got up at 11:30 p.m. So that's when it was visible from our house. And for like somewhere in the middle, like the 50% phase, we got up at 2:30 a.m. In the last phase, the smallest crescent phase, we got up at 6 a.m. So here are the 12 phases that we took and the percentages, and we combined them in Photoshop to make a overall detailed moon. And we called this the phase stacked moon. And here it is. Almost all craters are visible, and when you compare it to a single full moon image, it really does make a difference. And when you zoom in, the phase stacked moon, which is on the left, you can see every crater, while on the right, the craters look more like smudges. You can only see this big crater and maybe a few craters here and there. So this is the waning phase stacked moon that we did this summer. And we had actually done this before on using the waxing phases back in January before the pandemic started. And at that time, we didn't have our CA telescope, so we had to use our 600 millimeter lens. So that's why the moon doesn't look that great. So here are the specs of the project. We took a total of 12 phases and 37 videos. So we had to stack about 2 to 5 image panoramas of each phase, like 2 to 3 image panoramas of the smaller crescent phases, and 4 to 5 image panoramas of the bigger gibbous phases. The total size of the videos was more than 150 gigabytes. We took 4K videos at 30 frames per second and stacked a total of 25,000 images out of the 75,000 images that we took. So about 33%. And we took more than 45 hours to process the data. So 20 hours to stack them in a software called Registax, and 20 more hours to stitch them in Photoshop. And the whole project lasted a month. So now Jay is going to talk about how we stitch the images in Photoshop. So there were two main steps that we had to do. One was because the moon wobbles in its orbit. The more formal definition for this is libration. We needed to manually align each of the craters, and then after that, making the composite seamless was a difficult job, as we had to brighten and darken specific areas of the moon to make it seamless. So here's an example of how libration works. So during a 20% crescent phase, take this mare for example. It's facing more toward us than away, whereas on the right, during a gibbous phase, it's slightly closer to the edge. And that's what libration is. The moon slightly wobbles during its orbit around Earth. And so aligning the phases was quite a challenge. But we managed to do it in Photoshop after many, many hours of manual alignment of each crater. So here's a short video clip. Now I have two different phases, and reducing the transparency of the top phase, I can see through and align using the puppet warp tool, which is in Edit Puppet Warp. And with that, I can drop points and drag those points to align the craters. And that enables me to stretch the image in different ways, therefore helping to counter the libration or the wobble of the moon. So I simply drag, make a point, drag, and it aligns the craters. Here's another clip. Now I just put a point and move it. Same thing for the other craters here and the bottom left. Just put a point and drag it. Again, this is in Edit Puppet Warp. So that's one of the tools that helps you align images. But this one is quite special, Puppet Warp, because you can make points and drag, which enables you to stretch the image. Any other alignment tool wouldn't do the job. So after the alignment was complete, which took about 4 to 5 hours, blending the phases was actually the toughest part. See what it looked like just after we finished aligning the layers and cutting out the craters. It's quite a mess. Now we needed to make this image seamless because some phases ended up being darker than others, and obviously there's some weird looking brush strokes everywhere. So the first step we did was make many adjustment layers that helped neutralize the overall unevenness of the tonality on the surface. So we made the moon gray and removed any unnatural looking dark areas. This was using a bunch of curves adjustment layers. We could have used anything else, but we decided to use curves. And then we went in and fixed the minor details. Let me go ahead and zoom in, such as this detail and areas like here, and they're just all over the place. And to fix those areas, we used tools known as the dodge and burn tool. The dodge tool brightens a spot and the burn tool darkens it, and it works the same as the brush tool does. And there are plenty of Photoshop tutorials explaining how the brightening and darkening is done using the dodging and burning. So here's a clip of me doing that. So I zoom in, use the burn tool to bring back detail in this mare. And we used a regular full moon image for reference so that we could make the moon looking natural again. So here I'm darkening down the mare. And I use the dodge and burn tool for the rest of the areas of the image to make it seamless. And that itself took 16 hours, a really long time. We had to go in and fix every single area. And even today, we discover some flaws that we go in and fix. And so here's our latest output from that project. And this image allows one to appreciate all of the craters at once, something that wouldn't have been possible on a regular full moon. And that's why we love this image. We can look at Copernicus, we can look at these other craters up on the right and down here. And this is an all-in-one package. You can see every crater. Now this brings us to the end. There might be some questions on the phase stacked moon.
Boy, that's fantastic. I think we're all kind of mesmerized on that phase stacked moon. Have you submitted that for any contests?
We have not submitted it to any contest, but we've submitted to the Astronomy Picture of the Day, NASA's Astronomy Picture of the Day, and it's not in a pod yet. It's only on their social media page on Facebook and on their Instagram account. Huh?
When you submitted that, did you explain to them
Yes,
what it really meant?
I explained everything and all of the nuances and how we did it, the duration of the project, and that we took all of the phases and blended them together. I don't know what they're gonna do with this. Maybe they got rejected, and we even sent the Milky Way panorama to Astronomy Picture of the Day. And so far, I don't know what they've done with it. We sent it 3 or 4 months ago, and it's still not. We still haven't gotten a response, or I don't know. But
Well,
yeah, we sent these two images to NASA, and this one they liked because it's on their Instagram page, but not in a pod yet.
well, they don't actually respond, but I'm surprised after reading that because I'm not sure I've ever seen another image like that. Even though it looks like a full moon picture, which it is, it's really not. It's something special.
Yeah,
And there's a lot of commentary on the on YouTube on the degree of concentration and effort that you had that the two of you had to put in to make this image and actually all your images. So where do you find that kind of concentration?
well, we just love photography, and the Milky Way panorama was something that we decided to do because we didn't want to do the same old landscapes like this because there are just so many pictures. The market is saturated with these kinds of images. Everywhere you look, you see the Milky Way and foregrounds that are better than this one. And so we wanted to create an image that really stands out. And that is why we put so much effort into this. Otherwise, our images would just be the same thing, Milky Way, roads, maybe have water here and there and landscapes. But uh, with this panorama project, we've really, I could say we really made a name for ourselves, and we have got a great head start on astrophotography. And it was actually a very fun project. We really enjoyed it. And for the phase stacked moon, it was an idea that I just thought about back in December last year. I was just thinking about the full moon and why you can't see any craters. And I thought, why don't you just combine all the craters? And looking around in the internet, I didn't see much of any. I mean, people really hadn't done that. Sometimes people just blend the full moon with a half moon phase to get a little bit of depth, but we decided to blend all of the phases of the waxing, and this summer we did the waning phases using our C8 telescope. So because of the pandemic, we really spent a lot of time doing this project, and that enabled us to improve on the phase stacked moon, which was originally done in January this year.
So what are your plans next? What do you,
Well, we don't know. Recently, just last week, we camped for the first time. I mean, not in an RV, but tent camping. We hadn't really tent camped before. And now, looking into the future, I think that's what we're going to do. Tent camping in dark places and taking the Milky Way. And we really want to improve our photography skills, not just astrophotography, but regular as well, landscapes, wildlife, and even macro imaging. And hopefully enter some more competitions and maybe even win those. But we're really passionate about photography, and I'm 17 and I'm planning to take a gap year before college so that I can travel a little bit more when this pandemic is over, maybe, and finish off going to the last two states that I haven't visited, Alaska and Hawaii, and that'll make it 50 states. So that's what I want to do in the future.
so what are your professional plans after that? You must have thought about it.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about it. I'm undecided, but it's always something or the other. Before it was medicine, and now it's engineering, and then Soon it'll be something else, and I'm still undecided on that. That's why I'm taking a gap year so I can think about it while also traveling, visiting those last two states, as I said. And I also want to improve my Spanish skills, something that I haven't been doing a lot lately. But when I take the gap year, I can hopefully improve on that language.
What about Neil? Neil, what are your plans? You're a couple years behind, but you must have thought
Well,
about it.
I haven't thought about it yet either. I was thinking about engineering or architecture, but I'm still kind of undecided.
Uh, what happens when you show all your images and what you do? Well, you don't have classmates, you're homeschooled, but you must have friends that have an interest in what you're doing as well. They must be pretty amazed.
Yeah, we have some friends at our local club, the Fort Bend Astronomy Club, and they were really impressed with our images. But I don't think we've shown it to like people who are not into astronomy. We've just shown these images to astronomers and the who are into that field. But when we do outreach at local schools, we do show astrophotography images, but we haven't yet shown these two images, the phase stacked moon and the Milky Way panorama. We were just showing our first attempts at deep sky imaging, which was not impressive at that time. But if we're able to go and do outreach once more, which I hopefully want to do, we might show these two images as well as our other landscape and Milky Way images. Now that we've improved.
Neil and Jay, as much as I like looking at your images, could you stop sharing your screen, turn your camera on, and let's see it?
Sure.
Eric, you're doing a great job interviewing.
Well, this is fascinating. It's kind of like mesmerizing on what a fantastic job you two have done. I mean, you probably take it for granted because you've lived it for a couple of years, but we look at something like the phase stacked moon, and I'm going, I don't know if I ever could do that.
Yeah, it's just that we like to do things that are different. Usually, instead of just doing the regular deep sky imaging, we like to do, well, crazy things that turn out to be very interesting.
Have you talked to your parents about getting a bigger and faster computer? I'm sure you have, but any prospects there?
No, I'm still working on that. But
Alex?
when I bought the computer, I didn't think I'd be doing all this. That was the computer predates our interest in astrophotography, so we didn't really think we'd be using Photoshop to its maximum and freezing our computer so many times. We didn't think we'd be doing all that.
Wow. Hey, is there a way that people can reach you? Do you have a Facebook page or a website where people can contact you?
We don't have any social media accounts, but
Okay.
I can. I have an email account that I
Well,
can
but
share.
let's
Yeah,
not.
I know.
You
So
talk to your parents. I mean, I hate to say this, but before you be giving that out, and if you want to, you can annotate it in the comment section of the YouTube after it gets there. But generally speaking, it's something that you should consult with before you do
yeah,
that.
By the way, at the end of the presentation, when we end it, please stay on so we can chat a little bit after that.
Is it possible for us to get a link to the big moon picture? Barbara Harris was asking that.
currently I'm not going to share that picture.
Okay.
So that's what I'm doing right now. I don't give the moon picture around, but I'd be happy to provide you the link for the Milky Way image.
Okay. I think we got the Milky Way, don't we, Molly?
Yeah, we posted that earlier.
Okay. Do we have all the questions, Eric? Is there anybody else?
I don't see anything new. Mostly it's just people are kind of mesmerized by what you two have done. I am.
Jorge Hernandez is asking, do you have tutorials over the internet? And Jorge, you can write further comment down here. Are you talking to Jay and Neil, or are you talking to the Astro Imaging channel in that question? Okay. I, Jay, do you have do you have any tutorials or anything that you put out any YouTube?
No, we don't. We don't have any YouTube videos or any of that.
And the Astro Imaging channel has 300 and some programs out there, and in a sense, they're all tutorials. They're all presentations. Not all of the quality that you saw with Jay and Neil tonight, but they're all pretty darn good, and they do a lot of stuff. So in either way you're asking that question, Jorge, or George, depending on what part of the country you're from, what part of the world you're from, you know, yeah, we do have lots of tutorials on the Astro Imaging channel, but Jay and Neil don't put out any of their own. Okay, I think that's all our questions, and that's stuff. Remember, next week we'll be coming back here, and is it Barbara Harris will be here next week. Barbara, I don't know if you're out there. You were out there, I know. Has Molly sent you a link to tonight's show so that you can come in and practice for next week, or is anything yet? That's just a special side note to Barbara. And then we'll have
I didn't send that to her because I've seen her do other presentations and stuff before. I think we can get her spun up before the show starts, and they'll be fine.
Okay. Amy's coming the week after that, and Alistair's the week after that, and then we need more presenters. So volunteer yourself, folks. Okay. And let's see what else. Does that conclude the show? We got everything in.
I think we're good.
What about us watchers donating to get them an updated computer? I'm in for an initial $50. I don't know if we've got the mechanics to handle that.
Yeah, I don't think we do.
Yeah, I think we better avoid that, but maybe somebody should contact Adobe like it says there, or somebody else that says, give them a better, powerful, whatever. Thanks everybody for being here tonight. I hope to see you again next week when Barbara will be here with us. So thank you very much. That takes us out. Molly, you're in charge now.
All righty.